She was just reading in the park, calm and quiet, until a racist officer arrested her without cause. But this wasn't just any woman. What Officer Sarah Mitchell didn't know is that the person she just cuffed is the newly appointed police commissioner. What happens next is a powerful clash between prejudice and authority, and a wake-up call that changes everything. The late afternoon sun hung low over Edinburgh's Bruntsfield links, casting long shadows across the manicured grass of the park. It was a crisp March day in 2025, the kind where the wind carried a bite and the air smelled faintly of damp earth. Officer Sarah Mitchell adjusted her uniform jacket, her hazel eyes scanning the expanse of the park. She'd been patrolling this beat for 3 years, long enough to know every dog walker, every jogger, every face that belonged in this mostly white, affluent neighborhood. So when she spotted the woman lingering near the edge of the park, hands in her coat pockets, Sarah's instincts kicked in. The woman didn't fit. She wasn't rushing home with a reusable grocery bag or chatting on her phone like the usual crowd. She stood still, her posture relaxed but deliberate, watching the horizon as if waiting for something. Her dark skin stood out against the muted tones of the park, and Sarah's mind, trained by years on the force, flagged it. Suspicious. Out of place. She hated that her brain worked that way, but it did. She'd seen enough petty thefts and vandalism in quieter corners like this to trust her gut. "Excuse me, ma'am," Sarah called out, her voice firm but polite as she approached. The woman turned slowly, her expression calm, almost too calm. She was tall, with sharp cheekbones and a neatly coiled bun atop her head. Her coat was expensive, tailored, not the kind of thing a loiterer wore. Still, Sarah pressed on. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" The woman tilted her head slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Enjoying the view," she said, her voice smooth, accented with a clipped British edge. "Is that a problem, officer?" Sarah narrowed her eyes. The confidence threw her off. Most people stammered or fidgeted when questioned, but this woman didn't blink. "It's just that you've been standing here a while. We've had some reports of suspicious activity lately, people who don't belong hanging around." The woman's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't belong," she echoed, letting the words hang in the air. Sarah felt a prickle of unease, but doubled down. "I'll need to see some ID," she said, stepping closer. "Routine check." And the woman didn't argue. She reached into her coat pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a slim wallet. Sarah took it, flipping it open. The name hit her first. Olivia Carter. Then the title. Police Commissioner, Lothian and Borders Police. Sarah's stomach dropped. She looked up, meeting Olivia's steady gaze. "You're Commissioner Carter?" Sarah's voice faltered, the weight of her mistake sinking in. Olivia had been appointed just weeks ago, the first black woman to hold the post in Scotland's history. Sarah had seen the headlines, the press conferences. But here, in the fading light of Bruntsfield links, she hadn't recognized her. "Off duty," Olivia said coolly. "Though I suppose that's hard to believe given your diligence." Sarah's face burned. "Ma'am, I didn't mean to—" "Assume," Olivia cut in, her tone sharp but measured. "You saw me standing here out and decided I didn't fit. Why's that, Officer Mitchell?" She glanced at Sarah's name tag, her eyes piercing. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. She wanted to say it wasn't about race, that it was just protocol, but the lie stuck in her throat. She'd profiled her, plain and simple, and now she was staring down the barrel of her own prejudice, at the worst possible person. "I'm sorry," Sarah managed, handing the ID back. "I misjudged the situation. Olivia took the wallet, slipping it back into her pocket. Misjudged, she repeated, as if testing the word. That's one way to put it. She paused, then stepped closer, her voice dropping. You're not the first, Officer Mitchell, and you won't be the last. But here's the thing. I don't have the luxury of letting it slide. Not anymore. Sarah braced herself for a reprimand, a formal complaint, maybe even the end of her career. But Olivia didn't raise her voice. Instead, she said, "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Sarah fell into step beside Olivia, her boots crunching against the gravel path that wound through Bruntsfield Links. The park was emptying out now, dog walkers heading home, the last joggers disappearing into the dusk. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Sarah's mind raced, replaying the last 5 minutes. She'd just accused the police commissioner of loitering. Worse, she'd let her own bias lead the charge. She wanted to apologize again, to explain, but Olivia's presence, quiet, commanding, kept her mouth shut. They walked for a minute before Olivia spoke. "Tell me something, Officer Mitchell. What did you see when you looked at me?" Sarah hesitated, her throat dry. "I saw someone standing alone for a long time. It didn't match the usual pattern here." Olivia nodded, her eyes fixed ahead. "That's the surface. Dig deeper." Sarah's stomach twisted. She knew what Olivia was after, but admitting it felt like stepping off a cliff. "I thought you might not belong here," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because of how you looked." "Because I'm black," Olivia said flatly, cutting through the euphemism like a blade. It wasn't a question. Sarah winced. "Yes," she admitted. "And I'm sorry. It was a snap judgment. I didn't mean—" "Stop!" Olivia interrupted, holding up a hand. They paused near a bench overlooking the park's small pond, the water rippling faintly in the breeze. "I don't need apologies. I need you to understand something." She turned to face Sarah fully, her dark eyes locking onto hers. "You didn't just see a black woman and decide she was trouble. You saw a black woman in a white space and assumed she couldn't belong. That's not a mistake. That's a system talking through you." Sarah bristled, her defenses flaring. "I don't think like that. I've worked this beat for years. I stop anyone who looks off, no matter who they are." "Do you?" Olivia's voice was calm, but it carried an edge that made Sarah falter. "Tell me, how many white women in coats like this one?" She gestured to her tailored wool trench. "Have you stopped here just for standing still?" Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. She couldn't recall a single instance. Joggers, sure. Teenagers in hoodies, absolutely. But a middle-aged white woman in a nice coat? Never. The realization hit her like a punch. Olivia didn't wait for an answer. "I've been in your shoes, Mitchell. I started on the beat too. Glasgow, 20 years ago. I know how it works. You're trained to spot threats, and somewhere along the line, people like me get coded as one. It's not just you. It's everywhere. Every day." Sarah stared at the ground, her hands clenching at her sides. She wanted to argue, to say she wasn't that kind of cop, but the evidence was standing right in front of her. "So what now?" she asked, her voice tight. "You write me up? End my career over this?" Olivia studied her for a long moment, then shook her head. "No. I don't ruin people for being human, but I don't let them off the hook either." She stepped closer, her tone softening but firm. "You're going to do something harder than take a reprimand. You're going to walk with me, figuratively this time, and see what I see." Sarah frowned, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means tomorrow. You're meeting me at headquarters, 8 a.m. sharp. I'm putting you on a special assignment. 1 day, under my watch. You'll shadow me, see the calls I take, the rooms I walk into, the looks I get. You'll feel what it's like to be the one who doesn't belong, and then you'll tell me if it's just a snap judgment." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I—" "You are," Olivia cut in, "because if you're half the officer I think you are, you'll want to understand. Not just for me, but for yourself." She paused, letting the words settle. "Unless you'd rather I file that report." It wasn't a threat, not really. It was a challenge. Sarah swallowed hard, then nodded. 8 a.m., I'll be there." "Good." Olivia turned back toward the path, gesturing for Sarah to follow. "Now let's finish this walk. I've got a meeting in an hour, and I'd rather not be late because of this." As they moved through the park, Sarah's mind churned. She'd expected anger, punishment, maybe even a public shaming. Instead, Olivia had handed her something else, a chance to see the world through different eyes. It scared her more than any disciplinary action ever could. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the Lothian and Borders Police Headquarters at 7:55 a.m., her stomach in knots. The building loomed over Fettes Avenue, a squat, modern structure of glass and concrete that felt colder than the March wind whipping through Edinburgh. She'd barely slept, replaying the park encounter in her head, questioning every move she'd made. Now, standing in the lobby in her pressed uniform, she felt like a rookie again, uncertain, exposed. Olivia appeared at exactly 8 o'clock, striding through the security checkpoint in a crisp blazer and skirt, her heels clicking against the tile. She didn't smile, but her nod was brisk, professional. "Mitchell. Good. Let's move." The day unfolded like a storm Sarah couldn't outrun. She trailed Olivia through meetings, briefings, and site visits, a silent shadow in a world that moved faster than her beat ever had. At first, it was the small things that struck her. The way a senior officer's handshake lingered a beat too long with Olivia's white male deputy, but was curt with her. The way a room of detectives fell silent when she entered, their eyes flicking to her, then away. Subtle, but constant. Sarah had never noticed it before. Not like this. By noon, they were at a community center in Leith, a working-class neighborhood with a rougher edge than Bruntsfield. Olivia was there to address a recent spike in vandalism, meeting with local leaders and a handful of frustrated residents. Sarah stood by the door, watching as Olivia fielded questions with a calm authority that silenced the room. But then a man, white, middle-aged, his voice thick with a Scots burr, stood up. "With respect, Commissioner," he said, though his tone dripped with anything but. "We've had 3 break-ins this month. Where's the action? Or are you too busy playing dress-up in that fancy office?" The room tensed. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, her instinct to step in flaring. But Olivia didn't flinch. She met the man's gaze, her voice steady as steel. "I'm here now, Mr. Fraser, and I've got 2 new patrols starting next week, funded through a budget I fought for. You'll see results. But if you've got a better plan, I'm all ears." He grumbled, sat down. The meeting moved on, but Sarah couldn't shake it. The way he'd challenged her. The way the word "dress up" had landed like a coded jab. She'd seen hecklers before, but this felt personal, rooted in something deeper. Later, in the car, a sleek black SUV driven by a taciturn sergeant, Sarah finally spoke. "Does that happen a lot? People testing you like that?" Olivia glanced at her, one eyebrow arched. "Every day, Some are louder about it. Most aren't. She leaned back, crossing her arms. What did you think of him? Sarah hesitated. He was rude, disrespectful, but I don't know. Maybe he's just angry about the break-ins. Maybe, Olivia said. Or maybe he's angry because I'm not what he expects in charge. You tell me. Sarah didn't have an answer. The rest of the ride was quiet, but her mind buzzed. She'd spent years policing people, reading their behavior, but she'd never had to question the lens she used. Now it was cracking. The day's climax came late, after a briefing at a station in the Old Town. A call crackled over the radio. A disturbance at a pub on Grassmarket. 2 men fighting, one armed with a broken bottle. Olivia, already on her way out, turned to Sarah. You're with me. Let's go. They arrived to chaos. Shouts, shattered glass, a crowd spilling onto the cobblestones. 2 officers were struggling to separate the men, one bleeding from a gash on his arm. Sarah moved to jump in, but Olivia stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. Watch. Olivia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the din like a whip. Enough! The crowd parted, startled. She didn't raise her fists or draw a weapon, just stood there, radiating a quiet power that made the brawlers freeze. Drop it, she told the man with the bottle. He did, the glass clattering to the ground. Within minutes, the scene was under control. The men cuffed, the crowd dispersed. Back in the car, Sarah stared at her. How did you do that? Olivia shrugged. People expect me to shout. I don't. They expect me to fail. I won't. She looked at Sarah, her expression unreadable. What about you, Mitchell? What do you expect now? Sarah didn't know how to answer. She'd seen Olivia command a room, diffuse a fight, take every slight in stride. And she'd seen herself, quick to judge, slow to question. The gap between them felt vast. The sun had long set by the time Sarah and Olivia returned to headquarters. The day had stretched into nearly 12 hours, and Sarah's legs ached, her mind a tangle of exhaustion and revelation. They stood in the dimly lit parking lot, the city's hum a faint backdrop. Olivia leaned against the SUV, her coat draped over one arm, looking less like a commissioner and more like a woman who'd fought a quiet war all day. So, Olivia said, breaking the silence, what did you see today? Sarah shifted her weight, searching for words. She'd seen a lot. Disrespect masked as questions, authority challenged at every turn, a woman who refused to bend under it all. But it was more than that. She'd seen herself reflected in every sidelong glance she'd ignored on her beat, every assumption she'd let slide. I saw you, she said finally, and I saw me, how I've been part of it without even knowing. Olivia nodded, her expression softening just a fraction. That's a start. Most don't get that far. Sarah looked down at her boots, scuffed from the day's chaos. I don't know how you do it. Keep going, I mean. With all of that. The looks, the comments, the weight of it. I don't have a choice, Olivia said simply. Not if I want to change anything. But you do. She straightened, fixing Sarah with a steady gaze. You can go back to your beat tomorrow. Keep doing what you've always done. Or you can step up. Be part of something bigger. Sarah frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying I need officers who get it, who see the cracks and want to fix them. I'm starting a task force, community outreach, bias training, real change. It's not glamorous. It's hard, messy work, but it matters. Olivia paused, letting the offer hang. You in? Sarah's breath caught. It wasn't a promotion, not in the traditional sense. It was a chance to rethink everything, her instincts, her career, her place in the world. She thought of Bruntsfield Links, the moment she'd stopped Olivia, the shame of it. Then she thought of today, the pub, the community center, the way Olivia had turned every challenge into a lesson. She could walk away, pretend it never happened, or she could face it. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. Olivia smiled, small, genuine, the first real one Sarah had seen. "Good. We start Monday. Get some rest, Mitchell. You'll need it." They parted ways then, Olivia disappearing into the night, Sarah heading to her car. As she drove home through Edinburgh's winding streets, the city lights blurring past, she felt a strange mix of relief and unease. She'd crossed a line today, not just with Olivia, but within herself. There was no going back to the officer she'd been yesterday. But what she'd become, that was still unwritten. The next morning, Sarah woke to a text from an unknown number. Check the news. She fumbled for her phone, pulling up the local headlines. There it was, front page of the Scotsman. Commissioner Carter announces new policing initiative amid calls for reform. A photo showed Olivia at a podium, resolute, with a subheading about bridging divides. Sarah's name wasn't mentioned, but she knew she was part of it now, a cog in something larger, something unfinished. She set the phone down, staring out her window at the gray dawn. The world hadn't changed overnight. The biases she'd seen, the ones she'd carried, were still there, etched into routines, whispered in casual remarks, lurking in quiet parks. But maybe, just maybe, she could help shift it. One step, one day, one choice at a time. And somewhere out there, Olivia Carter was already at work, proving it could be done.